Um, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and you who are viewing on Zoom, Carlton Turner. Mr. Carlton Turner, who will tell you his lineage, is the founder and co-director of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, better known as SIPP Culture. I need you to also know that he represents his community and Mississippi nationally and internationally. He is on more boards than I can think of. Most notably, has been on Imagining America and the Kennedy Center, right? Part of the Kennedy Center. So join me in welcoming my friend, Carlton Turner. I knew you were going to want to walk around.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. My name is Carlton Turner. I am a son of Utica. I'm the son of Emmett and Genevia Turner. Emmett being a son of Harlem. My mother is from this community. Family's been in this community for 8 generations. The grandchild of Sammy Roberts and Epsy Roberts. And the great-grandchild of Eliza and Soap Broadwater, and the great-great-grandson of Gus and Sarah Terry. All of those folks are from this area. And I'm excited to be here to talk about the work that we're doing at the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. I don't even know, sometimes I don't know where to start. It's just so much going on with the work, but I grew up in this community. My grandfather was a farmer, and his father was a farmer. I like to often, I deal in stories, so I'll often just get into storytelling, and that's how I talk about the work that we do. My mother, who's 81 years old, will be 82 in December, doing her thing. She was a proud student of this school. I went to school here as a high school student and as a junior college student before going on to Alcorn State University and becoming a teacher, and taught for about 40 some odd years here in Mississippi and in New York. She tells me the story about when she was 5 years old, and she wanted to go chop cotton with the family. And her mother thought that she was too young to chop cotton. She was like, that baby don't need to be going to the fields. However, her grandfather was like, let the baby go to the field. If she want to go to the field, let her go to the field. So he took a hoe that was broken and chopped it off so that it'd be her size. And she marched to the field with her grandfather at 5 years old. And she's been growing food ever since, you know what I'm saying? But I would often listen to that story, and I would inquire about, well, you know, whose field was it? I wanted to be mad with somebody. I want to know who had my mama out there at 5 years old chopping cotton, you know, for who she was chopping cotton for. I need to know all of these details because those were important parts of my story that I needed to have access to. And, you know, I never asked her that question. I just assumed that she was chopping for some white family, you know, because that's just the way that everything was going in those times. And so I guess maybe about 8-10 years ago, I asked her the question, said, well, Mama, whose cotton was it? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, whose cotton was it? Who were you chopping for? She said, it was our cotton. It was our field. We were chopping for ourselves. And I was like, well, that flies in the face of all the things that they tell us about land ownership, about who was working for whom, about self-determination, about Black communities and ownership. It just flies in the face of all that. I said, well, what happened? She said, well, basically, you know, I can remember that being the situation, us chopping cotton, us raising, you know, food and everything, and then going to the sale. And I remember the exact year that we chopped cotton, and your grandfather went to Utica to sell the cotton, and he came back, and he had all these hopes for what they were going to do with the money, you know, from this cotton that was going to get to Christmas and going to do this and going to do that. And he came back defeated. He said, I can no longer do this anymore. And that was the last year that they worked their own land. After that, my grandfather went and got a job with the county making bridges, building bridges. So that also told me a lot about the economic structure. that although they had the land, although they had the skills to grow, they didn't have access to the marketplace that allowed them to monetize their labor in a way that support the community and support their family and be able to build the type of wealth that you can build. If you're talking about now, I am the fourth generation removed from that process. So I think that these are all things that the Utica Normal Industrial Institute was looking at and trying to address, and looking at issues of self-determination and growing food and building infrastructure based on the land that you were a part of. And so the work that we're doing at the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production is an extension of this legacy that already existed in this community. I like to say that we're not innovators, we're just continuators. We're continuing the Black genius that existed before us and making it more present and more real to the communities and the generations that we are part of. So what the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production is we are we're about rural community development. And the way that we get to rural community development is through engagement of the community in a community engaged design process. It's through using story as the foundational principle by which we organize community, because everybody has a story. Everybody's got their own story. But when we begin to share those stories together and then compile those stories into collective narratives, then our community begins to have a story. And that's something we can build on. And then the other thing that we work in is food. Food is primary, it's foundational. It's the one thing that everybody on the earth does, no matter what economic, social, political, whatever status you have, you eating or not. The food is part of that process. And connected to food is our culture, our songs, our dances, our clothes. It's everything. It's culture. Agriculture is the foundational aspect of culture. So when we think about arts and culture, it all springs from the way that we grow and the way that we organize ourselves around food, because food is the thing that we have to have in order to have in our existence, have our lives. And that's the basis of our communities. So we started doing this work, my wife and I, Brandy Turner, who's the co-founder and co-director of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. We started doing this work in 2017. We started with a community engaged conversation that asked 4 primary questions. We put maps on the walls of the Tri-County area, and we asked the community to map 4 places. We wanted to know where you live, where you worked, where you shopped, and where you worship. And what we were able to distill from those questions was that Utica, that used to be a seat of cultural production, this Utica Institute was founded in the heyday of that cultural production. It had now become a bedroom community in which people only sleep inside of Utica and everything else they do outside of Utica. They work outside of Utica, they shop outside of Utica, and they even start going to church in big churches in the city outside of the town. So when we asked the community to kind of like sit with that for a moment and think about what does it mean to be a community that used to be this foundational space of cultural production that is now turned into a space that is about sleeping. You know, you come home, you eat dinner, you sleep, you get up, you go back out. And the community, 2 things that we recognize in that moment is that, one, the community hadn't accepted the fact that it had become a bedroom community. It was still critiquing the systems of the community based on the fact that it was still a center of cultural production. So the way that it would think about leadership was that, oh, we don't have a grocery store. That's because leadership ain't did such and such. No, we don't have a grocery store because our community no longer economically can support a grocery store. But if we don't unpack that, then we think that it's leadership issues, or we think that it's a failure on someone's behalf, and not the fact that the community itself has changed. The makeup and the fabric and the design of the community has changed. And so we began to answer these questions, and we then wanted to know if people were content with being a bedroom community, and clearly people were not. And so if you're not content with that, then what is it that you want to be as a community? And until we can identify that, then we're just going to be waiting for someone to come and save us, and nobody's coming. We found that out too. Nobody's coming. It's going to be us. If we're going to change the community, we've got to do it. Nobody's going to come change it for us. So we began working with the community to identify the things that were most important for the community. The grocery store has always been at the top of that list since 2014, when they closed both Heinz AHS here on the campus, and they closed the grocery store that November. So they closed the high school in May, and then they closed the grocery store in November. Since November of 2014, the number one thing on the wish list of the community of Utica has been a grocery store. Well, that's a challenge, because a grocery store is both an economic model that has to work on an economy that's based in the community, and it's also an extractive process. You know what I mean by extractive process? Where the money going? The money ain't staying in Utica. If someone comes and opens a grocery store in Utica, the money comes from our pockets into the grocery store and then out to the ownerships of the grocery store, which more than likely will not be in Utica. So it's an extractive process. So it actually isn't building community agency or community wealth. So none of those things really work for us in this moment. But what we can do is think about food. So let's back up a minute. Everybody needs the groceries, but people are talking about the grocery store as the only means to get the groceries. And we begin to interject into that conversation. Well, what happens to local food production? Where's that at? Because I remember those stories my mama told me, and I remember growing up with my grandfather when we would harvest and grow fields of sweet potatoes and greens and corn and black-eyed peas and sugarcane and watermelons and everything you wanted to eat. Somebody in the community had it. What happened to that moment? Well, what we saw in the pandemic was that we thought folks had forgot how to grow. But when folks were trapped in their homes and couldn't get out to the grocery store, I know y'all saw it, all them little pop up in the front yards and on side yards, folks growing squash and greens, and folks hadn't forgotten how to put a seed in the ground and cultivate it, right? So how do we water that part of the community? How do we nourish that part of the community? How do we begin to rebuild an economy based on the foundational thing that we need, which is food? And the lucky thing about us is that we are in a community that has this history of the Utica Normal Industrial Institute that was really touting and preaching the same mantra, that there's ability for us to create economic development around the things that we already have in the community. We don't have to go looking for that. And that economic development is based on material needs that our community has. We all got to eat. So that's what we've begin working on. So we began working on developing the three major aspects of our work in the town of Utica, which is we started working on an artist residency space. So on White Oak Street, right across the street from my man up there, we have a house that we renovated into an artist residency and office space. And it's our base of operations. And what we conduct there is we have artists that we support that come in and stay with us for a week or 3 weeks or a month. And they work on projects that are based in rural communities throughout the South. We serve artists in a 5-state region: Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. And we provide them financial support. We provide them with consultations. We provide them with a space to stay and to think about their work and develop their work over the course of a year-long process with us. We also began, after the pandemic, developing a community farm. So on the corner of Curtis Road and Main Street, we have 17-acre plot that we put in a 1.5-acre vegetable garden and an 1,800 square foot commercial greenhouse, and began a program called the Small Farm Apprentice Program, which is training young aspiring farmers in local food production. It's an 18-month program. We have one young man that is actually completing the program. His completion date is on Sunday. So he will have completed 18 months of the program, and is now has certifications as a farmer, small farm production. And we also have a building on Main Street, which used to be the old Napa Auto Parts store on the corner of Main Street and White Oak Street, that we're turning into a community cultural center and a commercial kitchen. And that commercial kitchen will have the ability to create value-added products from the food that we're harvesting and growing, but also from association of network of farmers that we're working with throughout the U.S. South. And so all of these elements are about creating opportunities to grow food, to deepen our understanding of the culture of our community, ground our stories there, and begin to build and rebuild an economy in our community that is based on the self-determination of the folks of Utica to begin to solve the problems that they're faced with every day. So we started in 2017. We have a staff of about 10 people right now. We've gotten as large as, I think, 13 or 14 last year. Right now, we've been struggling through the drought, as many farmers have, trying to figure out how to continue to produce food when the climate is saying, nah, you just need to take a break. I got this summer, you know, and it literally just fried everything. And interesting enough, the only plants that survived through the drought were plants of an African origin: okra, peppers. They're the only plants that survived through the drought. They're growing okras like this. We're getting literally, I think we probably harvested somewhere around 1,000 pounds of okra in the last 2 months. It's just producing ridiculously. But that's something for us to note and understand, that as the climate changes, we have to begin to adapt our growing practices to the regions and the climates that our climate is now most resembling. So there's a history of growing that we are able to tap into. We just have to be keen to understand what that is. I want to just share a couple of more things, and then I'll create some space for questions. So we also do research, and we think research is really important. We think it's important to have good information to base our decisions on. We think it's important for communities to have the knowledge to be researchers and to research their own communities, and not just have other people probing us and telling us who we are, but that we have the ability to tell you who we are. And so we have been engaged in a series of research projects, the first being a project we did a few years ago during the pandemic, which Gene Green was helped to anchor our community advisory group on, and it was called Equitable Food Futures, in which we were looking at the role of stories, oral histories, focus groups, of stories, the role of stories in a community's ability to make decisions about their food infrastructure. And so that was a 3-year research project that we worked on. And now we're currently in a project with One Nation, One Project, which is an initiative around arts, access, and health and wellness. And that project is a collaboration between SIPP Culture, the town of Utica, and the Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health Center, in which we're looking at access to art, and specifically food access, as the basis of our research, looking into our community development and the connection between access to food and health and wellness. And so that will result next summer in a festival on July the 27th, 2024. We're doing a food festival, a food art and wellness festival in Utica on Saturday, July 27th. It will be part of 18 cities around the country that will be doing events on that same day under the same framework of One Nation, One Project. And that project, we're really excited. We're getting a lot of community members engaged in that work. And then our next project, research project, is another 3-year initiative that is looking at this idea of trading in cultural memory. This idea of stories and the ability to tell stories and receive stories as being fundamental to the health and wellness of African American communities and those from the African diasporic areas. And so we're working with the Center for Africana Studies at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, as well as a research team that we're putting together, and a community advisory team that will help anchor that research in the community and create more community access on research methodologies, on controlling data, and being able to tell their own story from that data. I think that's about it. That's it. There's a lot of stuff, but yes. All right. Any questions? All right.
Interesting data regarding the USDA funding Black farmers, things of that nature. And the decline that's happened because of those inequities funded decades ago. And so I wonder, as SIPP culture, or have you all, I'm sure you have been working with the USDA, but are there some ways that with these small farmers that you're training are encouraging them or showing them how to navigate the USDA supplying of loans and things of that nature, or to find external funding outside of the USDA?
Great question. Yes. So yes, we're doing all of that. We work with the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, which is actually has a voice in the crafting of the Farm Bill that is up, in this next appropriations package, the Farm Bill, which is for folks that think agriculture is a little thing. Agriculture is the second largest budget in the United States, only behind the Department of Defense. So it's a ton of resources available. And yes, the generational discrimination that the USDA that has impacted Black communities because of the USDA inhibits a lot of development. There was $5 billion that was made available by the Biden administration for Black farmers as part of the ARPA funds. And that money has still yet to get to Black farmers because it's been held up by a legal challenge that was put forth by a group of white farmers in Wisconsin that said it was against the Constitution for the U.S. government to fund these Black farmers because it violated the clauses basically saying that you can't make race-specific pots of funding. And so even when there's money designated, it's still impossible to get. And so I think the second part of your question, which is about other resources outside of the USDA, we actually don't receive any funding from the USDA. We have participated in a number of projects with USDA funded projects, but they've never been money that we have received from the USDA. We do work with a number of funds that do fund Black farmers and minority farmers throughout the South, through the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, through the Southern Black Farmer Community-Led Fund, which is a $6 million pool of funding that is designated for Black farmers in Mississippi and Alabama. We also work with SAFON, which is the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network, which supports the development of organic farms in Black communities across the South. And we encourage farmers to understand that these networks are there to support you despite the problems and challenges you may find with either the federal government or even with your state agencies of the USDA, which make it really difficult to receive the funding and resources that you need. There are some exceptions, of course, and I would say if you have the time and the capacity to go after those funds and resources, do that. But it takes a lot of funds and resources to go after them, and to also, once you get those dollars, to make sure you have systems in place to track those dollars as you're spending them, because I don't want to play with the federal government. So, any other questions? All right. Thank you so much. If y'all want to come visit us, we're open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, 319 White Oak Street.